All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. A little bit of a cold right now, but I think you should still be able to hear me okay. Um, all right. So today I want to talk about the muscles, not the lecture side of things, but more like the lab side of things. And then we'll also talk about the nervous tissue. We'll kind of do our little written kind of outline that we usually do after we talk about the muscles for a bit. I think it's probably going to be better just to start with lab stuff. So, a reminder of what we've talked about so far. We've done this lecture right here, muscle contraction, groups, and neuromuscular junction. And then we also did this lecture right here, muscle tissue. So last SI session on Monday, we would have done both of these lectures in that session, okay? Sorry about the time change for today. If you guys saw in my announcement, next week we're back to Monday, and then Thursday of next week will be 9 to 11 a.m. like we kind of have been doing. I already talked to you guys about the muscles lab and packet. Remember, you need all of the origin, insertion, action, and innervation for each muscle, handwritten, for your 25 points. On the actual lab exam itself, you will just be labeling the muscles and identifying them. You won't be testing on the origin, insertion, action, and innervation. And then for the lecture exam, it'll just be the definitions, right? Waiting for my next page to load here. All right, any questions at all for if you've maybe started your lab packet or questions in general about the final or the tests? Anything? Just waiting for this stuff to load. All right, again, this is your packet. I think the people that are in here have already heard me go through this, so I'm not going to cover it again. Just wanted to pull it up in case anybody had questions about it. But remember that this is something you want to be working on. These exact pages will be on your lab exam, just like this. They'll be colored in, and you'll have these exact pages to reference, and you'll be tested on labeling these. The letters will be whited out on the exam, and you won't be able to see the letters. You'll have the muscles colored in, and then we'll ask you to identify the colored muscle for the lab exam, right? So you're just writing down origin, insertion, action, innervation for each muscle for points. No, you won't be. I don't think we'll move out of the breakout room today. I think we're just here until 5. And then potentially we will go out at 5 because 5 to 6 I will be here for tutoring. But for our SI session, we should be in here the whole time. Okay, don't forget to look at this guide to muscles. It should be accessible in your study resources module. In it, there is the answer key for the packet. So if you guys have not started the packet yet, all of the answers for what the correct muscles labeled are available for you guys in this guide to muscles outline. All right, all of that correct answers that you need to know for your test are available here. And then you can click on this link for the origin, insertion, action, and innervation, and you can just search the muscle you're doing, and it will show you the origin, insertion. You can kind of pare it down and make it more simple if needed. And that would be available to all of you in the study resources module, okay? So study resources, and again, it's called Guide to Muscles right here. Guide to Muscles, okay? So everybody should have access to a copy of that, okay? Any questions on that? So transitioning to our models side of things, we already went over the sarcomere model, right? It was pretty simple, and it all kind of follows the muscle contraction. So we already went over that model together, this sarcomere right here. Waiting for it to load. Very slowly. And then there's also the neuron model, right? So we'll kind of go over this one right now. This is the neuron that you already had for your first unit, but we're going to go over just to make sure again that you have everything labeled. So I'm going to label that right now for you guys. So remember, we have our dendrite, these white structures, those would be your dendrites. And then we have our cell body, right? This kind of entire structure represents the cell body. You have your endoplasmic reticulum of the neuron, which is called the Nissl bodies. Okay, so Nissl bodies. This is the endoplasmic reticulum of the neuron. This is a new term for you guys. You didn't need to know this for the first lab exam, but you do need to know it now. So I'll try to change my color. It would be these, the blue and red. Does that make sense? These guys here, those are your Nissl bodies. There's more of them over here. Okay. Nissl bodies. And then you already know your nucleus and your nucleolus, right? Nucleolus. And then you know your axon hillock. The axon hillock is this part right here. And then your axon. And then remember that these guys here are actually the telodendria of another neuron. Remember how we talked about NSI on Monday, neurons communicate neuron to neuron, right? So this is actually the telodendria of another neuron. I'm just writing that in parentheses because for the lab exam, you would not need to write of another neuron. I'm just reminding you because sometimes students feel confused. Why are the telodendria at the top? And they're at the top because they're actually coming from a different neuron, right? And then the bottom here, these little knobs, those are your synaptic knob, right? Also called your axon terminal. So you would want to know both of those names in case you saw that on a multiple choice. Okay, so that's everything for this image. Again, Nissl bodies is your key term that's new. And then you also have a few more on one of the other pictures that I'll show you right now, okay? Any questions there at all? Okay. All right, so the next model is this one right here. It is very, very similar to the one we just did with a few differences. So again, these would be your dendrites. This is your cell body here. You kind of already know that, so I'm not gonna label that again. All of these little blue dots here, those represent your Nissl bodies on this model, okay? Again, those are the endoplasmic reticulum of the neuron. All right, so that'll for sure appear somewhere on your exam, but we'll also be testing you on these other parts. So just be prepared with all of these parts of the neuron, okay? This would be your axon hillock. These are your telodendria and the synaptic knob or axon terminal again, right? Telodendria. Synaptic knob, axon terminal, and then our axon itself right here. And then we have our actual axon here. So this is one of the parts that's different than the one we just looked at. So the axon is that reddish or pinkish part that runs down the middle. And then the yellow coating is the myelin sheath. So it's all of this yellow coating is that myelin sheath. Where there are little gaps or indentations in the myelin sheath, those are called nodes of Ranvier. So right here, that's a little indentation. You can kind of see how it dips down. And then there's another one right here, nodes of Ranvier. And we'll talk about what those are in just a minute when we go through the outline, okay? And then the covering around a neuron is called the endoneurium. Covering around a neuron. All right, and that would be everything for this view of the model. And yes, the ER is pointing to the blue parts. So the endoplasmic reticulum are all of those little blue guys. I just have a star to kind of represent all of that stuff would be Nissl bodies. Okay? Any questions on that? All right. But go ahead and move on. We'll talk about the very last neuron model, and then we'll talk some about muscles, and then we'll get going into lecture, okay? Okay, so looking at this guy right here, this is our third type of neuron. You might see this one on the test. Few things here that are a little different. So it's going to be the same things, but they're going to look a little different. So the dendrite is this green little structure at the end here. Okay. Then you'll see your cell body, your nucleus and nucleolus. The Nissl bodies would be these little red, would be your Nissl bodies. Axon hillock, be this part right here. And then your axon is the part that goes right down the center. And then we see that there's this branching of the axon. So this is something that's important, that's different on this model than any other model. They are called the terminal branches right here, or axon collaterals, okay? Axon collaterals, terminal branches. I've seen it appear both ways. Just know both terms. I believe axon collaterals is the term we use more often, but I'm not 100% on, like, terminal branches could be used, so I would know both. So again, it's that when the axon branches, that's different from telodendria. So these, let me see if I can, no, red's not good. Blue maybe. Okay, does everybody see these little silver, like spider looking legs? Those would represent your telodendria. So that's why this model is special, because this model shows both the axon collaterals, which again are the branching of the axon, and the telodendria. And then lastly, we have our synaptic knob or axon terminal right here. They are these little yellow guys. And if you guys look, you see that it's attached to a muscle, right? So this would represent a motor neuron and a neuromuscular junction, right? If you guys remember from your lecture, it's a motor neuron and a neuromuscular junction, and we know that because it's synapsing with a muscle, okay? Everybody got that? So that should be everything for all three of those. You can see myelin sheath on this model, but we could test you on myelin sheath, but we're not going to test you on nodes of Ranvier because it's kind of too hard to tell on here. Myelin sheath. Okay. Any questions there? Okay. All right, so I'm gonna go through, I don't know, we'll just kind of see what you guys want to do. I'm not sure exactly where you guys are at with your studying, but I want to do what will help you guys the most. Okay, so I don't know, let me see if I can try to do it in the chat. Do we want to do start with nervous tissue? B, go over the leg now. C, go over the arm now. And then I'll do one or the other of the leg or arm once we finish with, like, if you wanted to do. Okay. Okay, most people right now are voting, just so you know, I'll just do the arm, and then I was just gonna do the leg or the arm, and then I'll do nervous tissue. I won't do both. So most people seem to be voting for arm. So we'll just do an arm and then we'll do nervous tissue, okay? Does that work for everybody? And then like next session on Monday, I'll go over the leg. Does that make sense? So I won't like overwhelm you and do both. We'll just do the arm and then I'll do the leg on Monday. And then we'll go over nervous tissue as well, okay? All right, so let's go over the arm. Again, I'm working off of pictures here, so you're gonna be doing a lot better when you go over this in person. So I don't want you guys to feel like, you know, if you're confused or it's a little bit frustrating, again, like sometimes, this is honestly sometimes a bit confusing for me, but I remember the muscles like pretty much, I'm at like 95 to 99%. So I don't really struggle as much with remembering the muscles. Versus the bone. So usually I don't struggle, but I always check just in case I forget something because I don't want to accidentally say the wrong thing to you guys. But we'll start, I always used to start kind of on the back of the arm right here. So this is your subscapularis, and I'll kind of go through it how I used to go through it. Again, like I told you, subscapularis. I used to go through it upper and then lower. So we'll do the upper arm and then I'll do the lower arm, okay? So you know that you have your biceps brachii, right? Your biceps muscle. All of us are pretty much familiar with the biceps muscle. And you'll see when we rotate the arm that there's a long and a short head. But right now at this angle, we can't see that. So we won't do that right now. But the biceps brachii has two muscles near it that make sense with biceps brachii. That's what's so nice about the muscles, is the naming really makes sense. The bones are really annoying because the bones don't really make sense, but the muscles do. So for biceps brachii, the muscle that sits right underneath that, I don't know if you guys can see it, it would be like this muscle here. I'll try to kind of draw like a little circle. When we lift this little knob away, we'll see the brachialis underneath, but I just wanted to label it because I feel like it's kind of helpful to see it there. So the biceps brachii, underneath it has the brachialis, and then right here, this is the coracobrachialis. Okay, so brachialis underneath, and then the coracobrachialis. And then it just keeps like kind of it, this little part makes perfect sense because we go down to the arm where we would have the radius bone, right? You guys remember the bones you just learned about? And this muscle right here is called the brachioradialis. So on this view, it really makes a lot of sense. Coracobrachialis towards the clavicle, brachialis right underneath the biceps brachii, brachioradialis in line, but going towards the radius bone on the forearm. Does that make sense? So that's kind of an easy way to get those few down right there. And then we'll rotate and look at the other side, okay? All right, so let's go to the other side. So looking over here, you guys can see your deltoid muscle, which you're all familiar with right here, deltoid. So what I'm going to do is go to the one where it has the deltoid lifted off, just because I feel like the deltoid is pretty easy. So we have our infraspinatus. I wish there was a way to rotate this on my computer, but on Google Docs, there isn't that I've ever been able to find. I don't think so. So this is our supraspinatus. Supra meaning above, right? Spinatus meaning that spine bone right there. Infraspinatus, the one in between, right? Here's my spine bone, the spine of the like clavicle basically. Supraspinatus, infraspinatus, and then we have our teres minor and teres major. Teres major is going to be number 9, the one below. Sometimes that can be really large. And then teres minor is the one on top. Those two I just always think of, they're like twins. They always go together, teres minor and teres major. And then you'll see that you have your triceps brachii right here should be the, this should be the lateral head of the triceps brachii. Triceps brachii, and we know that because it's going laterally. And then this is one that I'll just double check just in case. Yeah, so that's the lateral head right here. Again, if you picture that arm being on your body, that would be lateral. Does that make sense? If it was like actually sitting on you, it would be lateral or going towards the side or outside. All right, so I'm going to rotate and we'll look at a different view and try to get some more of the triceps, and then we'll do the forearm. And we'll move on to nervous tissue. Okay, so I won't take too long on this arm, just kind of trying to get, let's see, that's all I want. Maybe this one. It's always hard with these images because they don't give you the type of detail you really want. Okay, so we have our biceps brachii and brachialis, and then there's a long head and a medial head. So here's our biceps brachii. And again, if we can picture which one would be medial and which one would be lateral, right? So the number 12 should be our medial. Let's make sure. So 12 is our long head here, and then 13 is our medial. This is again why, like I said, sometimes these are a little bit hard to do from a computer screen just because seeing lateral and medial can be challenging. A lot of times the medial is also called short and the lateral is also called long when it comes to the bones. That's a pretty consistent thing that you guys will see. And then I already showed you brachialis was right here. Okay, so that's our biceps brachii with our long, they're called heads. A head is like a division. So long head, medial, short head. Okay, and they're the two different divisions of the biceps brachii. All right, and then let's rotate and look at the triceps really quickly. If I have a good picture of it. Might have a picture up here. Here we go. These ones are a little less, this is like a less good quality muscle, but oh, you can see the 3 heads here. So this should be the long head of the triceps brachii and then the lateral head. So for triceps, you should have a long and a lateral. So this is pretty easy just because one of them looks really long right here. This 17 looks long. And then the other part of the triceps is lateral. So there's 2 heads. The lateral head of the triceps brachii is how you may see it abbreviated. And then this is the long head of the triceps brachii. Okay, so that's the upper arm all complete, and then we'll do the lower arm. All right. All right, so looking at our lower arm, you're going to see there's the flexor side and the extensor side. So if you take your hand and you clench your hand into a ball, you clench it really, really hard into a ball, you would be on the flexor side, right? You're flexing your hand. So this side right here is going to be your flexors, all flexors. Now, when you extend your hand out and you make it right? Fan all your fingers out, you extend it. That's going to be your extensor side. So you want to remember that when you're looking at your arm, right? Because this whole entire side is our flexor side. And again, the reverse or opposite side would be our extensor side. So they're kind of oftentimes named for that. So let's look at our flexor side first. So like I already showed you, you have your brachioradialis here. Brachioradialis. And then on the outsides, we have our flexor, and then they're named flexor, digitorum, and then the bone that they're on. So for number 23, it's going to be named flexor, digitorum, and then the bone that it's on would be radialis. Carpi radialis. So again, rewording that, I said digitorum, I meant to say carpi. So the carpes are our outside muscles. So flexor carpi radialis, the outside there, and then flexor carpi ulnaris is on the outside of the other side. So flexor carpi radialis, the outside over here, flexor carpi ulnaris, like the periphery or the outside over here. And then the one that goes to your palm, right, the palm of your hand, this is called the palmaris longus. It's easy to remember because again, it's very long and it goes towards the palm of your hand. Okay. And then we have our flexor digitorum superficialis. It's the one that basically, if you were to slice the palmaris longus off, the flexor digitorum superficialis would be this, both of these little guys right here. Then we have your flexor retinaculum. It's like this white kind of tendon. Then you have the different muscles of the hand, but we'll look at those in just a second because it's kind of hard to see from this far away. I'll zoom in on the hand. So these would be the muscles that you can see from this view of the arm. Okay. Then we'll go to the back. I'll do the inside though, because you have a piece right underneath this that we look at. Okay. All right, so right here, this is again still the flexor side, but now we're looking a little bit deeper underneath the surface, and we can see the muscles right underneath the surface a little bit better. So like I had said, this muscle here is called our flexor digitorum superficialis. It was called number 26. And as you see, this part here is still number 26. And what it's trying to show you is that the flexor digitorum superficialis used to be here, and then it was cut away. So this is the rest of the flexor digitorum superficialis. And then underneath, we have your flexor digitorum profundus. And then let's make sure 28. Flexor pollicis longus. So your thumb is pollicis. So this goes towards your thumb. So flexor pollicis longus. And again, this muscle is headed towards your thumb. Does that make sense? Your thumb is right over here. So the word pollicis means thumb. Flexor, it's flexing your thumb, and it's long. Flexor pollicis longus. And then this muscle right here, 29, is your pronator quadratus. Okay, pronator quadratus. So that means I need to go back and check the one muscle. Pronator quadratus. Okay, right there. So I think I actually mislabeled this guy right here earlier. So this guy is my pronator teres, because I know that the pronator quadratus and pronator teres go together. So that guy is the pronator teres. Sorry, I mislabeled that because the brachioradialis is this one right here. So those two are next to each other. So sometimes when they're next to each other, I get them confused. So brachioradialis again would be this muscle when we turn the arm. pronator teres is this guy right here. Pronator quadratus is like this little muscle that's hiding. And then you have your tendon of the flexor digitorum superficialis right there. Tendon of palmaris longus is 47, and we'll label that. And then let's take a look at your hand. Tendon of palmaris longus. And we'll look at the hand next, okay? So that should be everything from that view right there. A lot of this stuff with the muscles is just getting a hang of what it's talking about. It's very organized and makes sense. Like I said, most of them on the flexor side are named flexor. Most of them, if you think about where they are, they make sense. For example, pronator is helping pronate your hands. Remember, supinate is to hold a cup of soup, right? Pronate is to turn the soup over. So if you supinate, you're moving your like arm or wrist up. If you pronate, you're pushing it down. So the pronator muscles on this flexor side are going to help with the action of turning your palm down. Does that make sense? And if you actually sit there and kind of do that with your arm, you can feel how those muscles would be the ones engaged in pronating. So a lot of this stuff with muscles, it makes sense if you actually think about it, versus the bones was a lot of like, nobody knows what a tubercle is, you just need to figure it out. Does that make sense? A lot of this stuff makes sense. It's very logical. All right, we'll talk about the hand and then the back of the arm. Okay, so really quickly, we'll talk about our hand over here. So when you guys look at the hand, like I said, you have your thumb and then your pinky side. The thumb is going to be 3 different ones. Make sure I have them right. So the outermost one is your opponens pollicis. Opponens is this number 40 right here. It's kind of this outermost muscle. It's called the opponens pollicis. I always just thought of it like the opponent is on the outside, right? Opponens pollicis, opponent is on the outside, like your enemy. 41 is going to be the abductor pollicis brevis. And you'll see the longest when we get to the other side. And then flexor pollicis brevis. So like we had said right here, this guy here was called the flexor pollicis longus. And there's only like one exception in all of the muscles where there's not a longus and a brevis. So over here, we have the flexor pollicis brevis. So most of the time on the test, if you kind of forget, one of the things that I used to struggle with when I was doing the muscles was like, wait, does this have longus or brevis after it? And then I always remembered that they came in pairs. And like I said, this is like with the exception of one muscle, but for the most part, they always come in pairs. So if you see flexor pollicis longus, there's a flexor pollicis brevis somewhere else, right? Like these two are right next to each other. And then we have our adductor pollicis. Remember, to adduct is to bring something together. So this adducts the thumb towards midline, called the adductor pollicis. And then we have our abductor digiti minimi, number 45, abductor digiti minimi. Digiti minimi is your pinky or your pinky toe, like your pinky of your finger or your pinky toe. And this is, again, abductor. It abducts or brings out from midline the pinky. So again, the muscles are very like logical. Abductor digiti minimi. It abducts the pinky. Digiti minimi means pinky, abducts the pinky. Abductor pollicis brevis. It's the short muscle that abducts the thumb. So very, very straightforward. The muscles that lie in between the fingers here are called the lumbricals. Lumbricals. The way I used to remember this is you can hold a brick, right? Hold a brick and maybe like throw it at a lumbar. I used to, in my head, it was like throwing something at someone's lower back, just how it worked. But the biggest thing I would tell you that's the tip is like hold a brick in the palm of your hand. And the reason that for this is You also need to know the muscles that go in between the back of the hand. So if you remember, you can hold a brick, lumbricals. Does that make sense? Hold a brick in the palm of your hand. So those are the muscles that go in between your fingers on the palm of your hand. All right. Any questions at all? Do the back of the arm now, the extensor side. All right, so when we rotate it here and we look at the back, try to see if I have one with all of it together. Unfortunately, this one is very blurry, but it's the best one that I have a picture of these three muscles right here. Okay, so again, like I've already said, and I told you guys I labeled it wrong, this is the brachioradialis. So this is the correct location of the brachioradialis, okay? And then we have 20 and 21, which are your extensor carpi radialis longus and extensor carpi radialis brevis. So again, this muscle here and this muscle here are your peripheral muscles. I remember how I said that if it's on the periphery or the outside, we name it by its action. And then carpi, these are on the outside edges. This is not a good color of font, let's do black. And then this one is radialis because it's by the radius bone, and it's the extensor carpi radialis longus. So as you know, they always come in pairs. So this is the extensor carpi radialis brevis. It comes in a pair because it had a longus and a brevis. Does that make sense? So they come in a pair like that. All right, I know this one is blurry, but we're just showing you these three, and then I'll rotate to look at the rest of it clearly. Again, extensor carpi radialis longus, extensor carpi radialis brevis. Brachioradialis is the one kind of at the center. So the two that go at the center are brachioradialis, and then this guy here is the pronator teres. Okay, brachioradialis, pronator teres. All right, so let's look at the other picture. So if we look here, this is the forearm. We know that our hand is down here, and these are our extensor muscles. So again, these are the ones that we just labeled here: extensor carpi radialis longus, extensor carpi radialis brevis. Extensor carpi radialis longus, extensor carpi radialis brevis. Then you have your extensor digitorum, I believe, 30. Extensor digitorum right here. So it's easy to remember because it extends the digits, right? Extensor, like we said, this is the extending side, and it extends the digits of your hands. Extensor digiti minimi sits right next to it, 31, and it's very small and narrow. And if you trace it, it actually goes out towards the pinky. So again, all of the muscles make a lot of sense. Extensor digiti minimi. It extends the pinky finger, right? And then we have the muscle that sits right next to it. Like I said, these are the ones on the outside. So this is the extensor carpi ulnaris. And then this one right here by the elbow is my favorite muscle. It's called anconius. I kind of remember it because it's by your elbow, and your elbow is a cone, and it sounds like cone, right? Anconius by your cone-like elbow, okay? And then the muscles that go in between your fingers on the palm, on the back of your hand, those are your dorsal interosseous. Again, those would go in between the fingers on the back of your hand. Dorsal interosseous, in between the fingers on the back of the hand. And then we also have our extensor retinaculum. Like I said, retinaculum is that white structure that goes around. On your flexor side, it's called flexor retinaculum. On your extensor side, extensor retinaculum. Good, so that's everything for this view, and then we're gonna look at the muscles underneath, and then we'll go talk about nervous tissue. All right. Okay, so opening it up right here, you can see that we have our one very visible muscle right here. And like I said, this is our brachioradialis, extensor carpi radialis longus, extensor carpi radialis brevis. This pretty big muscle you see right here is the supinator. Like I said, we know that we have the muscles that help us pronate and then supinate. So this is the supinator. And then we will rotate again to look at these muscles underneath here. So that's the main thing you can see on this drawing. Okay, so right here, zooming in a bit, well, not too much. It's very hard to zoom in on this computer. Every time I do it, it's always not cooperating. There we go. All right. So I have my two muscles that go towards my thumb, okay? And this is always a problem where they're not labeled super well in terms of like the location of the number. So this number right here is the abductor pollicis brevis. Okay, abductor pollicis brevis for 30, longus for 35. So the brevis is on the thumb, right? So that's where I was telling you guys that if you get confused whether it's a longus or a brevis, brevis is on the thumb. Remember how the thumb had the opponent's pollicis, then it had the abductor pollicis brevis, and then it had the flexor pollicis brevis. So sometimes you can think that through in your head on the test and say, okay, this is a longus because the brevis is on the thumb, right? So this is abductor pollicis longus, and abductors and the other action always go side by side. So this next muscle here is the extensor pollicis. Extensor pollicis. And then I believe it is a longus, but let's check. 36, extensor pollicis longus. Okay. All right, and then we have 37 back here. It kind of runs back there, and I believe that should be extensor indices. So it's going towards the index finger, which is like your pointer finger. So 37 right here, extensor indices. Extensor indices. And then, like I had said before, this is the supinator here. 34 is your supinator. All right, we already did our dorsal interosseous, extensor retinaculum, abductor pollicis longus, and extensor pollicis longus. That should be everything. What did my extensor? So I think extensor pollicis brevis should be an example of one where we don't have the brevis. So like I had said, sometimes you will have one where you have a longus without a brevis, and this would be that example, right? We have our extensor pollicis longus, but no extensor pollicis brevis. Okay. So that was kind of an overview. I know you guys need to spend more time than just that going over it, but hopefully that was kind of a good little review for you if you've already gone over the muscles. All right, so let's get going into our nervous tissue. Any questions at all? If you guys think of it, just let me know, okay? So like we had said, we're going to be working on the nervous tissue lecture right now until we finish up at 5. And then like I've already told you guys, I am here until 6 today for tutoring if you guys have any other questions, okay? So for the nervous tissue lecture, it's kind of divided into 2 components. So we have nervous tissue. And what we talk about is, weirdly enough, we talk really about 2 topics in this lecture. This is why the lecture is kind of organized a little bit strange. So we talk about the nervous system and we talk about nervous tissue. So first we go over how the nervous system is organized, and then we talk about nervous tissue, which is like the anatomy of neurons and nerves. The first part though is how is the nervous system itself organized. So when we talk about how the nervous system itself is organized, we break it down into structure. Let's do a different color. Let's do function. Function is obviously like what something does. So if you think about your function of your nerves, what do your nerves do? Your nerves have a sensory function, which means they sense incoming information, which we call afferent. So it's called the sensory or afferent nervous system. So that's like an entire section of your nervous system. This is what is sensing things and basically communicating them to your brain. So this is coming from your peripheral nervous system and traveling to your central nervous system. So when we talk about the nervous system according to structure, that's where we get these 2. CNS is for central nervous system, NS, nervous system, and the central nervous system is the brain and the spinal cord. The PNS is the other part according to structure again, so there'd be 2 parts. There'd be 1 CNS, 2 PNS, PNS peripheral nervous system. And the definition we give you guys is everything that comes off of the brain and spinal cord. So this, for example, would be things like your nerves would be examples of peripheral. So if we look back at the function, right, where I said PNS to CNS, maybe you sense something in your foot, like your foot, you stepped on a little piece of like a Lego, right? You step on a Lego, and when you step on the Lego, you have pain, and that pain carries back to the brain and spinal cord. So this would be like a nerve to your foot, right? A nerve from your foot travels back to the brain, telling you, I just stepped on this painful thing. So that's the sensory or afferent. Af means towards, so this is going towards the brain. The other one is motor or efferent. Motor or efferent, EF, and EF means away. So this is away from the brain. So this is going from the central nervous system to the peripheral nervous system. So example, your brain is sending your leg a command, telling it to move, to kick, or if you stepped on that Lego, right, to pick up your leg and not keep stepping on it. So sensory, afferent nervous system, motor, efferent nervous system. So each of the afferent and efferent functional nervous systems, they both actually sub-break down again. So I'll draw them like this and like this. So the sensory or afferent nervous system is going to break down into a somatic, sensory system, and then a visceral or autonomic sensory. The visceral or autonomic is always going to be what you are not aware of, and the somatic is what you are aware of. So you are aware of this. So what are you aware of sensing? You're aware of sensing things coming from your skeletal muscle, things like your skin, your joints, your fascia, your senses. So these examples are touch, pressure, pain, and temperature. So you are aware of all of these senses, right? You guys know when your skin is being touched, all of those things. So let's make sure I'm going to draw a little line like this. Versus visceral or autonomic senses, this is your intestines, your heart, your lungs, your organs, and we're going to just put etc. Do you know when you eat a meal how much digestive enzymes are being contributed by your pancreas? No, right? You don't have any sensation of that. But does your body know? Yes, your body knows how many digestive enzymes are being put into the food. Does that make sense? So your visceral or your autonomic is what you are unaware of sensing, things you are unaware of sensing. We'll do a different color here for motor just so it kind of sticks out. Somatic motor is going to be the things that you are aware of controlling. So like the senses, aware of sensing, now we're aware of controlling it. So this is your voluntary. So your skeletal muscle, right? We know that the skeletal muscle is voluntary. You want to move your foot, you're going to move your foot. Visceral or autonomic motor, just like with sensory, is the things that you aren't aware of. But this one gets more specific. So again, you're unaware of this, but this one subdivides again. So it's going to subdivide into our sympathetic nervous system and our parasympathetic, right? And these are both divisions of the autonomic nervous system. So again, the autonomic motor and the visceral motor, both names for the same thing, that is going to subdivide into the sympathetic and parasympathetic. Both of these act on smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, and glands. You do not have a specific location for visceral or autonomic sensory. Visceral or autonomic sensory just goes to like all organs, whereas visceral or autonomic motor specifically goes to smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, and glands. And then a kind of a general function of our nervous system over here is that it is responsible for functions to collect information. So it collects information. This would be through sensory neurons. It processes and evaluates information, and that would be through interneurons. And then finally it responds, and then that would be through motor. Okay. And then we're going to go through our rest of our chapter. I won't take, I won't go super slowly. We potentially will finish maybe even under 30 minutes from now. So if you guys are feeling like, I saw a few people leaving early. If you need to leave early, you can, but I don't plan to go all the way until 5 probably, just because of how long the chapter is. It probably won't take us that long. So hang tight. It probably will finish up in about half an hour. And then if you guys have questions, you can hang out. And then if not, I'll probably just kind of end early and be available for questions. So this is response. So your motor has collection of information, process and evaluation of information, and response to information. and this would be your motor neurons. Sorry, I saw someone put. Good. I know that it cuts off, the screen cuts off. Did everybody get all the stuff here? Smooth muscle, cardiac. Yes, those are the functions for the entire nervous system. It's kind of just showing you the 3 functions, and we're going to talk about interneurons in just a second. But basically, you have like, if this is a little man's arm, right? Here's my little person, and here's his brain. Information goes up to the brain, and that would be sensory. The brain kind of processes that information, and that would be like an interneuron. Then the brain sends down a command, and that would be motor. So those would be your 3 functions. What are we sensing? What are we processing? And how are we responding? Okay. Now it's the rest of the lecture. The rest of the lecture is on nervous tissue. The first part of the lecture is on the nervous system. How does the nervous system work? This part is on nervous tissue, and what does it do? So a main component is neurons. So we talk about the composition of neurons. We add some more things that you guys kind of don't know about. So we're going to talk first about the functions of the neuron. So our first function is to conduct impulses. The neuron conducts impulses. This is like electricity. And in a neuron, they specifically use the terminology depolarization. It's specific to neurons, but that's the same as electricity. Neurons have a high metabolic rate. This means they burn a lot of energy. Okay, so they burn a lot of ATP. They're constantly burning energy. They have extreme longevity. This means that they live for a very long time. They last forever, but they cannot be saved. So they cannot be saved when cut above the axon hillock. So you know how like lizards can grow back their tail? A neuron kind of reminds me of that, because if you cut them above the axon hillock, like in the cell body, they can't regenerate. But if you cut them below, like just the axon, they actually can regenerate. So the cell body of the neuron is non-mitotic. So again, neurons do not go through mitosis. So those are your key functions and characteristics. We'll put functions / characteristics of the neuron. So that's the first little part to your outline. The next part to your outline is the structure. I don't know if I love the word structure. Let's do makeup, like what they are made up of. So they're made up of 3 components: the dendrites. And you guys already know this, but maybe you don't know the function. So their function is to carry the impulse towards the cell body. So that's the function of the dendrite. So whether that impulse is motor or sensory, the dendrites are carrying it. You have your cell body. Function is to conduct the impulse. And remember that it has rough endoplasmic reticulum in addition to mitochondria and lysosomes and all of those things. And remember, I just showed you that on the model, right? Those are called Nissl bodies. So for the lecture exam as well, you need to know that those are rough endoplasmic reticulum found in the neuron. Then you have your axon. Your axon carries the impulses away from the cell body. Okay, carries impulses away from the cell body. Now we also have our axon collaterals, and remember I pointed those out to you. Those are our side branches. I called them also terminal branches that split into two or more off the axon. You remember that? So you also need to know that for your lecture exam. You have your telodendria. Your telodendria are terminal extensions at the end of each axon. At the end of the axon. And then lastly, I'll try to draw it over here because I know you guys, your screen cuts off. You have your synaptic knob, and those are the extended regions at the tip of the telodendria. So that is the makeup of the neuron. Okay. Now we're going to talk about, sorry, I have my very runny nose. Talk about neurons according to structure. Let's do two different colors here. All right, so neurons according to structure, and then neurons according to function. So I'm going to do the part that you've already seen before first, so it feels like you get a little review here. So afferent or sensory neurons are the first type of neuron according to function. And we know that these would be sensory receptors. And your example of the type according to structure, and I'll go over this next, is unipolar. So the first type according to structure is the unipolar. The unipolar neuron basically looks like this, and it has one process, that's like this part here, that branches like a T from the cell body. And I'm kind of writing this out because sometimes on the test, it can be hard to know the wording they're going to use to describe it. That's why I'm writing that. So one process that branches like a T from the cell body. The bipolar neuron kind of looks like this, kind of like a candy wrapper. It has two processes from the cell body. So again, that would be this one and this one versus the one process for unipolar. Lastly, multipolar according to structure is the type of neuron you guys are used to seeing, those telodendria, synaptic knob. So this is many dendrites and a single axon, and this is the most common type of neuron. All right, so then our second neuron according to function is your interneuron or association neuron. So the interneuron or the association neuron facilitates communication between the other two. So facilitates communication between sensory and motor. And then lastly, our motor or efferent neuron. And the motor or efferent neuron, like we know, is going to be for motor signals, but important according to structure is this is a multipolar. So we covered which one the unipolar is. It's the sensory. right? And we covered which one the multipolar is. It's the motor or the efferent. But which one is the bipolar? You would think it would be the interneuron. No. So the bipolar is located in the eye, the ear, and the nose. So these are the locations of the bipolar. The interneuron, according to structure, is actually an anaxonic multipolar. So we didn't talk about it over here. It's very simple, but basically what it means, anaxonic means no axon. So an anaxonic multipolar neuron is going to be a neuron that has no axon, right? But it's multipolar, so it does have dendrites and telodendria. Just doesn't have an axon. Okay. All right. So that brings us to the last little part here of this chapter, which is glial cells. And what we're going to do next week on Monday is we're going to talk about the brain and get into the brain, which is going to be pretty involved. So that's kind of why I'm just going to after we talk about the glial cells, like I said, I'm going to end it shorter than normal and leave space for you guys to ask questions if you have any. But that way, hopefully you guys can be prepared for next week, because I want to come to the brain lecture, everybody prepared, kind of like with the muscle. If you guys hadn't watched the brain yet, it's not really helpful for me to go over it. So we have a little more, like I said, another probably 15 minutes. So this was nervous tissue, neurons, right? Nervous tissue, neurons. Neurons according to function, their makeup, and then their structure and function characteristics. Now, when we look at nervous tissue again, so that was neurons. The other type of cell in nervous tissue is glial cells. So again, nervous tissue is made of neurons and glial cells. Neurons do all the work. Glial cells, their main function is to maintain neurons' health. So you could kind of picture the neurons like the patients. The glial cells are kind of like the doctors or the nurses. But the nervous tissue is our whole system. We need our neurons that do all the work, and then our glial cells that take care of the neurons. Glial cells are non-excitable. This means they don't respond to those electrical signals, and they are capable of mitosis. The most common type of brain cancer is called a glioma. And the reason for that is they are actually capable of undergoing mitosis, so they're more likely to have cancer development, right? So for the glial cells, you guys need to know 6 types of glial cells. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The first 4, let's do this in different color. The first 4 are in the central nervous system. So CNS, the first 4 are in the central nervous system. The last 2 are in the PNS, peripheral nervous system. So the way I remembered this was I just remembered the word amons. Amons kind of looks like amen. I don't know, you could probably come up with a different mnemonic. Minos, maybe? Mean. Oh, that won't work because you need the N there. Omens? Oh, like omens, but with an E. Omens. That would still work. Whatever word you come up with, just know the first 4 letters would be in the CNS and the last 2 in the PNS. So for me, I just remembered amens, and then amens was the word that I remembered, and then I knew that the first 4 were part of the CNS, the next 2 PNS. The reason that that's important is for the test, your pretty likely to be asked, is this glial cell found in the CNS or is this glial cell found in the PNS? And you want to be able to answer that. So just come up with an easy way to kind of remember that. So astrocytes, ependymal cells, microglial cells, oligodendrocytes, neurolemocytes or Schwann cells, and then the last one is satellite cells. All right, and so obviously they all have a function that you guys need to know. So for astrocytes, these are the most abundant in the CNS. So there are most common in the CNS. They help form the blood-brain barrier. Blood-brain barrier. Because we're kind of running out of room, I'm going to erase a little bit of this here so it doesn't get as overwhelming. So the blood-brain barrier is basically a filtering system in the ventricles, which we'll learn more about on Monday, but in the ventricles of the brain that filter the blood coming into the brain. So the blood-brain barrier is like a filter, a sieve, a mesh that filters that blood coming into the brain and creates CSF or cerebrospinal fluid. So creating cerebrospinal fluid through the blood-brain barrier. The ependymal cells also help form the blood-brain barrier, So together, the A and the E form the blood-brain barrier. The ependymal cells line the ventricles of the brain and the central canal of the spinal cord. So again, they're helping create filtered or purified blood, which is CSF. So CSF or cerebrospinal fluid is like a purified blood. It has no red blood cells. It's just nutrients. So it has no waste products. So this is really important for your brain because the neurons cannot regenerate. So let's say, for example, let me try to think of a medication that doesn't cross the blood-brain barrier. So let's say, for example, you take the medication, I don't know why I'm not thinking of anything. You take like a medication for your stomach, like a Tums, right? A Tums medication. A Tums medication would not be good for your brain because it is very alkaline, so it's good for your stomach. But if it got into your bloodstream and went to your brain, it could alter like the pH and be dangerous. But what about when you drink alcohol, right? When you drink alcohol, it's famous for crossing over into the blood-brain barrier. And the reason is the ependymal cells and astrocytes form a blood-brain barrier. It filters the majority of products out, but it does not filter out alcohol, like opioid medications, right? Like benzos. It's not going to filter out a lot of those meds that really mess with people's brain function. So the blood-brain barrier creates CSF. CSF is there to be all nutrients and no waste. This is really important for your brain health. This is why medications or drugs or alcohol that crosses that barrier can hurt somebody's brain so much. Does that make sense? Because the blood-brain barrier can't catch everything, and if it can't catch it, it can damage your brain cells. But as long as it's being filtered out and it's in that CSF and it's good, then, you know, if we have pure CSF without drugs and alcohol, then that person's brain health will be really good. All right, so microglial cells, these are motile, which means they move, and they are phagocytic. So they go around and they eat up waste particles. So they're motile and they're phagocytic, eating up waste particles. Oligodendrocytes produce myelin sheath in the central nervous system. So like we know, myelin sheath covers the axon, right? And then we also have, and I need to say a little bit more about myelin sheath, but just to show you, we also have these neuroleukocytes or Schwann cells that produce myelin sheath in the peripheral nervous system. So why is myelin sheath important? You guys kind of know what it is and how to identify it on the model. So you know it's like a fatty covering. So it has two functions. Function number one, it speeds up the rate of depolarization. The rate of depolarization is how fast the electrical impulse can travel. And the rate of depolarization speeds up because of saltatory conduction. Saltatory conduction is when basically we have the impulse speeds up the rate of depolarization because of saltatory conduction. Saltatory conduction is when the impulse travels from one node of Ranvier to the next. So for example, we have our neuron here, and and it has its axon with the myelin sheath, right? And these are those nodes of Ranvier. So what happens with the myelin sheath speeding up the rate of depolarization is we get that impulse jumps from one node of Ranvier to the next. That's called saltatory. Saltatory means jumping conduction. So saltatory conduction, jumping conduction from one node of Ranvier to the next. So that will be something you definitely need to know for your test, right? That the function of myelin is to speed up the rate of depolarization using saltatory conduction. Saltatory conduction is when the impulse travels from one node of Ranvier to the next node of Ranvier. That makes sense? I know it's a little bit of physiology, but you guys do need to know that, okay? Second function is a little bit easier. It keeps the impulse insulated, so it does not travel. So the impulse is likely to like accidentally travel to a different spot, and using the myelin sheath, we can actually keep it insulated so it does not travel. So it's like it keeps it in, right? If you picture a little impulse in here, it doesn't have any way to leave because it's kept kind of guarded by that myelin sheath. Okay, very last glial cell. So satellite cells, these go around unipolar neurons located in the dorsal root ganglion of the spinal cord. So you guys may or may not have looked at your dorsal root ganglion yet, but basically when you look at your spinal cord, you have a little back side and a front, an anterior and a posterior. And this is the dorsal or posterior root ganglion. And inside we have our various unipolar cell bodies. Unipolar cell bodies. Unipolar are the ones that look like this. So the satellite cells live here around that little unipolar cell body, keeping it healthy and alive. Oops. Okay, so those are your 6 glial cells and their functions. Your chapter also talks about Wallerian degeneration, which is very simple, and then the protective coating of nerves. So I'll just write those on the next page. And then at that point, we'll be done. Okay, so again, you have your nervous tissue, which was your glial cells and your neurons. And then the very first part of the chapter is nervous system. And then the last few terms of the chapter is just 3 terms here. So Wallerian degeneration. If you see a test question on this, Wallerian degeneration is the fact that neurons can only regenerate when cut past the axon hillock, not when cut above it. Okay, so again, if my neuron is cut here, right here, it will die, versus if it's cut below, it will live. And if it's cut at or above, so at or here, both of these will die. Wallerian degeneration is the part that the fact that it can regenerate, right, if it's cut at the axon, but not if it's cut at the cell body or axon hillock. So then lastly, we have our protective coating around nerves. This is your epineurin. The epineurin is around the entire nerve. Perineurin. The perineurin is around the fascicles. Okay, and these are little bundles or clusters of axons, a lot like our fascicles in the muscle. So again, here's my nerve. This has the epineurin. Inside are my fascicles. Fascicles have my perineurin. And then last, inside my fascicles are my actual neurons, and my neurons have my endoneurium. Okay? Endoneurium. Endoneurium. This is, right, the around each neuron. All right, and then that is it for today. Like I said, please don't leave. I'm here until 6 today if you guys have questions. And then if not, I will see you on Monday night, 4:45 to 6:45. We'll go over the brain. Okay? Thank you guys for coming. Appreciate it. I can't hear you for some reason. Do you want to try talking again? Let's see if I can hear you now. think my audio is all the way up. I still can't hear you. Wait, I think it's working now. Try now. I just heard you on mute.
Hello.
Hi. Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. I was trying to find the I know you went over in the beginning the packet key, but I can't seem to find it. I'm in vendors class.
Sure. Yeah.
So I went under. Should I look under modules or pages? I know that might be like the same thing, doesn't?
Sorry, I'm just pulling it up here.
No, you're fine.
You are looking for, tell me one more time.
The key for the muscle packet.
Okay. Should be in study resources.
Okay, let me look.
I'm pulling it up now, but it should be there. It's called Guide to Muscles. I may not have published it. No, I didn't. Let me publish it for you.
Okay, cool. I was like, am I looking in the right spot?
Okay, try refreshing.
And it was muscle links and muscle handouts?
Should be Guide to Muscles right here. Main content Guide to Muscles. So it should be in study resources if you refresh. I didn't publish anything in your module. I published in your
Oh, and study resources. Okay.
uh-huh.
Okay, cool. Now I can see it. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, no problem.